Hi everybody, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and we're going to move on from our Bishop versus Knight series and look at a different kind of game. In fact, well, just a different sort of situation altogether. It won't even be an endgame, at least not a pure ending. Maybe what Glenn Fleer calls a NQE, N-Q-E, not quite an ending in his recent book on endings, but or on not quite endings. Anyway, this will be, as I said, something completely different from what we've looked at the last few weeks. This was an email game that I played back in 2001 against a friend of mine who's, I think, at this point he's probably an A player, but I'm not sure. Anyway, he's typically been a low expert, high A player, and I hadn't played in a while, and so this was a chance for me to get into it and for him to play a stronger player. So something for everyone. We played by typical correspondence rules, where we had, I think, three days per move on average. And I just want to say a few words about correspondence chess or email chess. And it's that I think it's one of the best exercises that you can use to improve your game, and in a number of ways. So one way in which this is really helpful, first of all, is in learning your openings, because obviously you're going to be very invested in what's going on in your game in a way that you normally wouldn't be if you're simply opening up an opening book and trying to memorize a bunch of variations. So here you're really going to be motivated to look for the best moves you can, and to follow whatever the latest theory is, and to look ahead, and then as the opening is kind of wearing down, to try as best as possible to learn what the typical plans are. So as the variation in question is kind of winding down, one of the things that I certainly would do is to look for all the games I could in that variation with a certain sort of pawn structure that's similar to the one that I've got, and look, okay, what are the typical plans? Where do these pieces go? What are the dangers? And that sort of thing. And I found that the little bit that I did this, I mean, I've done this off and on in my life. And whenever I've done it, I've noticed a real increase in strength. So this email context was good, and doing it with a friend of mine, because we were able to agree to be honest, with no problem, to not use computers. So in that situation, it made it a lot of fun. I mean, if you want to play correspondence, there's always a danger that your opponents are going to computer cheat, and at least from my point of view, it's less interesting that way. Even if I can win against a player doing that, because computers have their limitations. You can go deeper just because you have more time and you can direct things. Though on the other hand, there's also the very realistic possibility that you'll miss something in just one critical variation, and that'll be the end of it. So there's you'll still get the benefit for yourself, but from a competitive standpoint, I at least find it not very pleasant to have to worry about that. But decide for yourself, obviously. That said, what you'll get out of it is tremendous. So there's that you'll learn the openings. There's also that you're going to get this tremendous practice in simply analyzing, which is extremely useful. I mean, there's nothing like the game being on the line, having that pride on the line to really force you to keep digging and digging. And I'm always surprised when I talk to people who tell me they're playing games on this or that online correspondence chess site, and they'll have played a 40-move game in 3 days, and I'm thinking, well, what really is the point, of playing correspondence chess in that way? I mean, there's just you're losing out on the entire benefit of it. So do it right, take your time, use it as a real learning experience first and foremost, and try to play the best players that you can, that you have a reasonable chance against. So anyway, that's what I think is a main benefit of it. A number of players have used this who have become great players. Paul Keres, most famously, the great Estonian/Soviet player. When he was young, he played, I don't know, some large number, like over 100 correspondence games at a time. And he did this for a number of years, and it brought him from being just a talented young player to one of the world's best players. I mean, he was still involved in some correspondence games when he was on the verge of super grandmasterdom. But a number of other very, very strong players have been active. Peter Lecko has played a fair amount of correspondence chess. The Swedish Grandmaster Ulf Andersson was for some years the world's highest rated correspondence player. And most of the world's best correspondence players are IMs or GMs, or at least IM players who had GM strength but quit over the board play to become correspondence masters. So all I can say are positive things about it. It requires a little patience, but boy, the payoff and the aesthetic satisfaction you get just from playing a beautiful game, a game of a caliber that is a lot harder to achieve in an over-the-board effort, that's really quite a reward. Okay, so let's take a look at this. This is the white game that I had in the two-game series. The black game wasn't so good. I won that, but it was marred in that at a key point when I was maybe just a little bit better, my opponent just blundered. And I have to say, that was one of the biggest disappointments that I had, was that even though I was the higher-rated player, I put in quite a bit more effort into it than he did. And I'm just thinking, now, to be fair, the guy has a really extremely busy lifestyle. But, if I had the chance to play someone as much higher rated than me as I was than him, then I would have really, done whatever I could to try to find a little extra time, because it's just a great opportunity. Okay, enough rambling. Let's take a look at the game. So I'm white, and I knew that my opponent was a dragon fiend, so I looked for a kind of a clever way of avoiding the dragon that wasn't bad. So, it's not like I'm just giving up immediate equality, but, some trappy ideas. So anyway, I played d6, knight c3. Now, the point of this shows up here after his next move. So he plays g6. If he plays knight f6, then I think he's going in the right direction. So then I probably have nothing better than d4. All right, there are some alternatives there, but really d4 is probably the main move. And, and then we're back in Dragonland after knight takes g6. But he played g6 straight away, and then here was my cute little transposition trick. So I took with the queen, and obviously now we're not getting a straight dragon. So he played knight to f6, and now I played e5. All right, so this is a variation that is actually pretty, well, it's not great. So I think black can first of all play d takes e5. That's not that bad, but it's not great either. So probably the move he played is the best, certainly the most common move in my experience. So knight to c6, bishop to b5, pawn takes, and we swap a bunch of stuff here, and we reach this position. Okay, and this position needs to be discussed to some extent. All right, the first thing to notice is that knight takes c6 is really nothing special, because bishop to b7 and he takes on g2. So that just doesn't give white anything. Okay, so since I'm not going to be a pawn up, what can we say about this position? Obviously, I've got a slightly better pawn structure, though I can't take the pawn on c6 straight away. On the other hand, black has the bishop here, but perhaps the most serious factor, at least for the moment and for the foreseeable future, is his king. Now, it's not that I'm going to give checkmate to it, though in fact I end up getting a mating attack fairly quickly in this game, but that it gets in the way of the rooks. So this king here makes life difficult for the rook on h8, and, well, as we'll see, black never really achieves full coordination of his pieces. But we still have to figure out now what white is going to do. So I can't take the pawn on c6. What should I do? Well, I don't think there's anything really better here than simply castling. Now, I am threatening to take on c6 at this point, and I think my opponent has maybe two main moves to choose from. So one thing he could consider is bishop to f5, attempting a counterattack, but in fact after knight c6, bishop c2, maybe bishop to g5, bishop g7, now rook f to e1. Again, remembering that black can never castle, so let's say e6, rook a to c1, and now maybe h3 or f3 or rook c to d1. Here white has a clear advantage. Again, the fundamental problem is black's king, right? It can't get out of the way, so the rook on h8 is kind of stuck, and he's got to worry about my dropping a knight on b5, wreaking some havoc there. So white has a clear advantage here. This is a very good position for him. Okay, so after castles, there's a second possible approach for black, and it's what my opponent tried. Knight to d5. And now taking on c6 really isn't that great. It's okay, but after knight c6, he takes, and then maybe plays bishop to d7, or just bishop to g7, make the obvious move here. Rook to e1, bishop e6, and black has some compensation, though really, okay, bishop g7 is probably premature. Probably best to just play bishop to b7 here. Just a second. And then after knight to d4, maybe f6, with the idea of king f7 and e5. And with the bishop pair and my fractured queenside structure, my advantage really isn't all that significant. So after knight to d5, I played a much more quiet move. I played bishop to d2. So I'm simply developing a piece, keeping my pawn structure intact, and now my rooks are connected. Now, here we have maybe a kind of a key moment in the game. Actually, okay, yeah. Here there's a few possibilities for black, some important options. So there's basically developing the bishops, but there's also the move knight to b4, which after the game my opponent felt was an absolute equalizer. Now, I don't think this is quite right, but proving it takes some real doing. So here I would say, I would encourage you maybe for the first time in the lecture to stop the recording and see what you can find for white. All right, so this is a little bit tough. Trying to find a clear path to an advantage. Maybe not a path to a clear advantage, but a clear path to an advantage. Okay, well, rook a to c1 I think doesn't really cut the old mustard, because simply bishop to f5 then, and the c2 pawn is a goner. So really what white needs to do is to find the best way of coordinating his pieces. Yeah, the c-pawn's gone, but black is going to lose some time. I mean, the knight keeps moving around and around to capture it, and so I should try to make the best that I can out of it. And in fact, I can even use the c-file to my advantage. So a3 is actually a good move, forcing black pretty much to take the pawn. Okay, now rook a to c1, and after knight to d4, bishop e3, kicking the knight and avoiding knight to b3 with an exchange. Okay, so knight to b3, and now probably best is rook c to d1. All right, and we can see here that although I'm still down a pawn, black's knight is the only piece he's got developed, and it's not very well placed at all. I mean, the only square it can go to right now is to a5, and once it's on a5, the only square it can go to is b7. So this is not exactly terror-inducing. Alright, so let's say black plays bishop to b7, trying to hold on to his pawn. Well, now rook to d7, and here the kind of complicated bishop to g5, rook b7, rook c7, and now rook e1 gives white a quite nice advantage, something at least on the verge of becoming a clear edge, and understandably so. Black is a pawn up, but he's got three isolated pawns. My rook is on the 7th. There's pressure along the e-file. His minor pieces are misplaced, and the rooks are still not connected. So definite advantage for white. How serious it is, hard to say, but definitely better to have white here than black. So the upshot then is that this move knight to b4 isn't really a full solution. Okay, well, what else can be played? Well, bishop to g7 can and has been played in other games, and white can consider taking on c6. Again, black will mess up white's queenside structure if he does, and also rook f to e1 is possible too. So a variety of things that can happen in this position. Maybe now knight to b4 is annoying. So probably best is maybe knight c6 and heading for this position where white has some edge. And in fact, in a game played between Zemarov and Yosha, not exactly household names, white did go on to win the endgame. Okay, well, anyway, my opponent didn't play bishop to g7, for better or worse, but played bishop to b7, protecting the pawn. And now I think here I like what I chose to do. So again, let me suggest that you stop the recording for a while and find the best move for white. Well, I hope that with this bishop on c5 especially, on b7 especially, excuse me, and with this isolated pawn on c6, your attention was immediately drawn to the c5 square as a potential outpost for a white knight. So something like knight to e4, c5, or knight a4, c5. So this, I hope, again, would have entered your thinking fairly quickly. If not, that's okay, but hopefully now it will. So if you can imagine a knight on c5 essentially unopposed, then it's, I think, a position where it's clear that white is going to be quite happy with what's going on. But there's at least a difficulty in executing this idea. Because if you play, let's say, knight to a4, well, then black can play... Well, actually, before we get to knight to a4, let's look at knight e4 first. So if knight to e4, with the idea, of course, of plunking the knight on c5, then maybe black plays bishop to g7. So let's take a quick look at this. Knight e4, bishop g7, and, okay, how does white defend the knight on e5? We don't want to exchange it for the bishop on b7 with knight c5. So, I mean, this would just be kind of silly, getting rid of black's horrible bishop here for this glorious knight on e5. So this would be just a kind of a foolish capture, really. All right, so what else can we do? Well, we retreat the knight. Let's say we bring it to d3. But then black can play bishop to a6, and he still manages to achieve the exchange of this bad bishop for the knight. All right, so this line is not so good. Okay, so that takes care of knight e4. Well, what if we play knight to a4 instead? Same idea. Well, okay, now black plays maybe f6, and after the knight retreats, then, okay, maybe, I mean, I kind of like to play e5, but I won't really achieve anything. But simply, again, bishop to a6 is possible. Once again, engineering the exchange of the bad bishop, and then after making the exchange, black will play things like king f7, e5, and he's pretty much out of the grip here. All right, so black is kind of crawling out and is achieving a tolerable position. All right, so this really isn't fully satisfactory either. So the move that I came up with was rook f to e1, and this is really an unprepossessing move. It looks just like a very stereotypical way to play, but in fact it's a good move for a variety of reasons. One is that it's protecting the knight on e5 in advance, so that if bishop to g7, well, then I can just play knight to a4, and also there's no pin. So if the bishop goes to a6, when a knight retreats, there's no pin. Black isn't exchanging off his light-squared bishop. Also, my knight on e5 is pre-protected, you might say, so I don't have to worry about bishop g7 takes e5 in any variations. In some lines, it's going to exert pressure on the e-file. In fact, we'll see that in this game also. So a final point is that it's kind of a waiting move to see what he does with his bishop and e-pawn. So if he plays bishop g7, I go to a4. If he plays e6, well, then I can play knight to e4. And, you know, the knight's just well placed on e4, whether it's getting into c5 or not. Okay, so in this position, my opponent played bishop to g7, very natural move. I should mention knight to b4 kind of in passing here, because, again, this looks kind of annoying. I mean, if I could play rook a to c1, that's not really so tragic. But there's even a very interesting alternative here for white, which is knight to c4. And then on knight c2, knight d6 check, king d7, knight takes b7, and white's much better in this position. All right, so knight c4 is a good move. Whether I would have seen it or not, I'm not sure. But in any case, rook a to c1, which I did analyze, does give white a serious advantage as well. I think white's clearly better here too. So, all right, back to the game. My opponent played bishop to g7, and now, as advertised, I played knight to a4. Actually, I'm quite happy that after just the initial opening moves, the computer, I think, seconds all of my actual choices. So some of the analysis that I did during the game, I mean, I have some variations that go to around move 60 in the analysis, and there are some errors in there. But in terms of the actual moves that I chose, I think the computer liked every move that I came up with. And when I say the computer, I'm talking about nowadays, not back in 2001. I didn't use the computer during the game. Alright, so anyway, knight to a4, the idea is quite clear. I want to play knight to c5 and just entomb this bishop on b7. Also, I'd like to displace his only good piece, so I'd also like to play c4 and kick this knight away from its happy location and stick it someplace where it's not quite so useful. Alright, now here I think at least the move that I was most concerned about and spent the most time analyzing was knight to b6, with the idea that, okay, knight to c5 happens, but then bishop takes e5, rook e5, knight c4, rook e2, takes, and then, okay, whichever I take, black has at least managed to exchange off a couple of pieces. So probably the best move here is the obvious one, which is just rook takes d2, because it leaves black with this lousy bishop on b7. So at worst, it's a good knight versus bad bishop scenario, and white certainly has a clear advantage in this position. I don't think there should be any question about that at all. For some reason, I got really excited about this knight takes b7 move, and I delved into some insane p-sack. And this is, again, part of the fun of correspondence play. So I'll show some of the lines here. So it's knight c4, rook a to e1, e6, b3, and now if the knight retreats, then I have knight to d6, or maybe c4, and then knight to d6. Lots of stuff that's possible. So rook to b8 tries to keep my knight off of there, and now knight c5. And then here, okay, I look at both knight b6 and knight to d6. And so after knight to b6, I went on this long flight of fancy here. So knight e6, takes, king f8. King d7 and king d8 are also possible, but I don't remember how much I looked at those. But this was, again, kind of just provisional and hypothetical. I mean, probably if this had come up in the game, I would have played rook takes d2. I would have gone for that good knight versus bad bishop ending. But again, this is part of the joy of correspondence games, that you can go on these long analytic flights of fancy. So king f8, rook f6, king g8, now rook c6, rook c8 takes, and then I basically analyzed this, not perfectly, but more or less to mate. In fact, I think in my main variation, yeah, it's almost to mate. So I go to move, I think, 56 in my longest line. Now, I'm not sure what the proper assessment of this variation is. I mean, certainly white's better. How much better, I don't know. And there are some inaccuracies in it. But, this would be a fun position to try to analyze, and to analyze it into the ground. Certainly I gave it a reasonable try. Had we gone down this route, I would have spent a great deal more time, and I would have found lots of the mistakes that I had made. But it was very entertaining, and I would suggest that you might want to stop this, write this position down somewhere, and see what you can come up with. Maybe play it against the computer, maybe play a correspondence game against your computer. So, you take a certain amount of time. Take maybe, again, as I said, an average of 3 days per move, and then when you're letting your computer think about it, maybe give it an hour or something, or let it think overnight when you're sleeping, and try that. All right. So whatever you decide to do with it, it's fine with me. Just pointing out an interesting little diversion here that arose. Okay, so going back. That was knight to b6 with the idea of, again, trying to swap off a couple of minor pieces, because black's position is really cramped, and all things being equal, exchanges favor him. Now, another move black could consider here is f6. But, okay, after I play knight c4, I'm threatening knight to d6, and I'm still going to play knight to c5, and I'd like to be able to prevent e5 if I can. I mean, clearly if he gets e5 in, that's at least a little bit of progress here for him. So, maybe king f7, getting out of the way, and now, okay, either knight a5 or knight c5. So let's say knight a5. And, yeah, certainly white has a nice advantage here. But black is still alive and kicking. So something like this. c4, knight b6, knight c5. And, obviously white's better, but maybe not as better as... Not as much better as I was in the game for sure. So, clear advantage, but black can still kick after this move f6. Alright, well in the game, my opponent played a move that definitely surprised me and that I think is clearly not a good move. He played rook to c8. Well now, of course, I played knight c5, and after bishop to a8, I mean, you know, what's that thing on a8? Whatever it is, it's certainly not a piece. So it's just a block of wood at this moment. But even so, the game still has to be won, and so I continue to get in good positional fashion. I've retired his bishop on c8, his rook on a8. Excuse me, his rook on c8 isn't doing very much. The rook on h8 is still out of the game. The only good piece he's got is the knight on d5. So let's take care of that. I played c4. He played knight to b6. And now I played b3, so I'm simply, I have to protect the pawn because he's threatening bishop e5 followed by knight c4. So this simply consolidates it. There's some, ghost pressure along this diagonal with my rook being on a1, but it's really nothing serious. Alright, now here too, a couple of moves for black. Actually, 3 moves I think I looked at. And so one of them is again trying to swap off stuff. So bishop e5, rook e5, knight to d7. Okay, so this is this was a main line that I was concerned about. But white is winning here, so just knight takes. And the interesting thing is that even though there are these opposite-colored bishops, and it looks like with his king off the back rank, he might even be okay. Even so, I'm still winning here. So just rook to d1. And I'm threatening bishop to b4 check, and then I pick off the e pawn. And I'm also threatening bishop to e3 check, followed by bishop takes a7. And as small potatoes as that might seem, that's enough to win. So black pretty much has to play king e8 here, at least that's his best move. And now just bishop to e3, if nothing else. Maybe there's something better, but bishop g5 is also really strong. And rook to a5 is good too. But anyway, bishop e3 is fine, rook c7, and then just rook a5. And I'm simply going to be up a pawn for nothing with a winning position. If he plays a6 here, then I can just embed my bishop on c5. So that was fine by me as well. All right, so that was bishop takes e5, followed by knight to d7. So the attempt to exchange pieces doesn't work. A funny variation, okay, is rook to d8, bishop c3, blocking the diagonal. And now, okay, if black plays f6, this will transpose to a line that I considered at some later point. In fact, it comes close to the game, and we'll see some of the ideas at that point. But all right, for bishop c3, knight to d7, here, see if you can figure out what white's move ought to play. So there's all kinds of confusing things starting to happen here. So see if you can figure out what white should do. Well, the answer is that white should not worry about the pin on the diagonal, and he shouldn't even bother with the knight on d7, though white will have an advantage in either case. But simply knight takes g6 is winning, with the point being that if black takes on c5 or on c3, then rook takes e7 is checkmate. So black has to play h takes g6. But after bishop takes g7 and then bishop d4, white has won a pawn, and has won a pawn while maintaining all of the advantages of the position, keeping the bishop on a8 completely out of play, and the rook on h7. Okay, it can come up via the h file, but it's not really all that useful just yet either. So white's winning, black can resist, and at any rate, this doesn't solve black's problems. Rook to d8 doesn't. So he tried f6, and for a while, a few moves before, I mean, by this point I had worked out what to do, but initially I was really concerned about this, and I had spent a lot of time looking at knight e to d3 and trying to figure out, what's the most that I can get out of this. So, for example, rook to d8 and bishop c3, king f7, and knight f4. All right, and this isn't so bad, but it's not clear, just how much I've got. So let's say e5 here, takes, and now f4. Actually, yeah, this was a line that worked out well for me. So it took me a while to get to this point, and I was happy with it, but what I chose in the game was even better. And also, black doesn't have to play e5 so quickly. I can maybe play rook to d6. All right, so then, of course, I plunk a knight in, but, this maybe isn't all that exciting after knight to d7. So there, and takes, rook takes, and alright, I'm clearly better, but how do I make progress exactly? That's sort of a difficulty, because I can't grab the the d file, because then he trades rooks and takes my knight. If I take his bishop first and then do it, well, then he can double rooks on the d file, and he's okay there, and also he'll get an e5. So, I'm sure there's some way for me to continue my advantage and to try to increase it, but it's not very easy. Black his defensive resources are increasing a little bit. So it just seemed to me at this point, after the way the whole game had gone, that Black just can't possibly deserve to be able to crawl his way out with king f7, e5, and so on, and make a game out of it. What has he done right in this game? His knight on b6 is dominated, his bishop on a8 is beyond dominated, the rook on c8 isn't doing very much, the rook on h8 is out of the game, his king is stuck in the middle of the board. So how could Black possibly deserve to have anything good happen to him in this game? And I think that's a really good attitude to have when you're in a position like this, because it makes you strive for the maximum, right? It gets you to really look for the best move, because you know that you deserve to have something there, and okay, it could be a miracle that you just don't have anything, but chances are that there really will be something. It's just a matter of putting in that extra bit of effort to find it, and that's what I did, and I was able to prove not only that it was an interesting idea, but in fact a winning idea, and it required some accuracy. So the right move here, and the move I happily played, is knight to e6. So I embed this knight in his position. But this requires some tactical justification, because after f takes e5, well, actually, before we get, well, okay, f takes e5, knight g7, king f7, my knight's stuck. And bishop to h6, it really just leads to nothing. Bishop h6, Black plays knight to d7, protecting the e-pawn, and, it's about equal. I have nothing special there at all. So, before we get to the fun details of that, if instead of taking on e5, Black plays rook to g8, then, alright, the game I think will last longer, but White is still in fantastic shape after, for example, knight to g4, okay, king f7, whatever, many moves here, bishop to b4, so we'll put some pressure on e7. Let's say he plays rook c to e8, which is natural. Then, okay, knight c7, f5, knight e8. Let's say rook takes e8, knight e5 check wins. Or if bishop takes a1, rook e7 check is mating. Like that. So, pretty unusual checkmating pattern to be sure. Alright, so the point of all of this then is that rook to g8 is a more patient approach, but Black is losing there too. Alright, so my opponent took, I took, and I played king to f7. And again, at first glance, it may seem as if I've gone a little too crazy here. But the thing is that now all of a sudden all the floodgates break loose, and my attack becomes overwhelming. Alright, so rook takes e5. Now here, a move I was concerned about for a while was knight to d7. And in fact, would challenge you to try to analyze this position out as best as you can too. So the idea of this is to simply kind of hold the fort here, follow up with the move knight to f8, and then my knight's just stuck, and then he'll round it up in due course, play rook g8, and maybe give up the or take on g7, even if it's for two pieces, even if I get the rook, but he'll get the two pieces. So at any rate, the best move here is, drumroll, the paradoxical rook e6. Very strange move, because it looks like it's just inducing him to make the move. Oh, that's right. Sorry. The point is, if I go backward, he has e5. Yeah, not knight f8, just e5, and then I'm not doing so well. So rook e6 is the right move here. And now Black has many possibilities, but none of them are going to lead to happiness. So for example, if knight f6, just play rook a to e1. If he plays rook c7, then I play bishop c3. Okay, so if he doesn't take, then I play bishop f6 and knight e8. My knight escapes. And if he does take, then I just take and grab the knight on f6, and I'm up 2 pawns with a completely dominating position. So rook c7 is no good. If he plays king takes g7, then rook e7 check, bishop h6, and it's game over with the threat of rook to g7 check. And if he moves the knight, then rook to e8 check is very likely going to be winning. Or actually, just knight if knight h5, g4. Yeah, very simple. All right, so that's what happens on knight f6. If he plays knight c5, now I play rook to e3. And one of the funny points, okay, let's see, it doesn't come up in this line, but we'll see the idea in some similar positions. Okay, so king g7, rook e7, king f8, rook a to e1. So again, we're threatening bishop to h6 check, followed by rook g7 and complete annihilation. So h5, and now bishop to b4 is winning. So knight to d3, and here I can play either rook to e8 check or rook c7 check. Whoops. And obviously this is devastating. Alrighty, so knight c5 is no great shakes either. If he plays rook c7, well, now I play bishop c3. Okay, and now if knight to c5, if knight c5, rook e3, and here kind of a funny line is, no, again, not that, but rook to g8, trying to win the knight. This meets a rather quick refutation. Now rook a to e1 wins here. A lot of moves win here, but that's good. But rook f3 mate is even better. So this is a pretty unusual pattern here. I don't think I've seen exactly this pattern before here. All right, if he plays rook h to c8, again, just old faithful rook a to e1, knight e6 is coming. I win. So the next try is, rook to g8. Again, rook a to e1. If knight f6, because if he takes on g7, then rook e7, and I take on g7, and that's simple. So knight f6 takes, knight e8, and my pirouetting knight escapes, and I win even more material. In fact, I'm threatening rook f6 mate, so it's not just the rook that's falling, but there's the mate threat. So black has to play rook takes e8 really to have, well, doesn't have a chance, but to have as best a chance as there is. Alright, so that's enough of that line. I mean, really, almost all the lines come to be the same thing. So let's look at the main line here, which is knight f8. Okay, so after knight to f8, kicking my rook away, now I play rook to e3. So here, if he takes the knight, then bishop c3 check, e5, takes, and here, although the material balance really isn't that bad for black, the fact that I'm penetrating here and able to take advantage of this dreadful bishop on a8 is really what does black in. So just about everything wins here. This is one sample variation, and black's position is completely lost. Alright, so knight to d7 I think is the best defense here with the idea of e5, but this idea of rook e6 and then only after knight to f8 to play rook e3 should be winning for me. Well, it is winning for me. Alright, another thing you can try is rook h to d8, and just quickly on this, bishop to h6 is winning. So for example, if rook to d6 with a little trap, so can white play c5 here or not? Little tactical puzzle for you. The answer is it's legal, but he certainly shouldn't do it, because after c5, black plays rook to d5, and it's no good. So the better way to play instead is rook a to e1 first, piling up on e7, and then only after rook c7 to play c5. So now that the rook on e5 is protected by the second rook, after rook to d5, white can just take the knight and win. Alright, so that's really all we need to say about this variation. Alright, so back to here. So this was again the game, and my opponent played king takes g7. I played rook takes e7 check, and black is in a real mating net here. Probably the best he can do, and maybe the only way to avoid the most immediate catastrophe, is with king to f8. Okay, so now I'd like to play bishop to h6 check here, but my rook's hanging, so naturally the move is rook a to e1. And here black is probably best served with the move h5. And now, funny enough, well, actually there's a lot of ways for white to win here, but rook takes a7 is right up there with a couple of ideas. One is to play bishop to a5, exploiting the fact that this knight has nowhere to go. So it's kind of funny. You know, black's knight looks perfectly safe where it is, but in fact there's no place for it to go. So forward squares are all covered by my pawns. D7 is covered by my rook, and the other retreat squares are blocked by his own pieces. Okay, and of course I'm also threatening a double on the 7th. So black's best may be, I don't know, let's say rook to b8. And now here, bishop to b4 check, king g8, rook e to e7, threatening mate in one move. So rook h6, let's say, rook g7 check, king h8, and now bishop c3 with a forced mate. No shock there. So I think all black can basically do is throw some material in the way, like knight to d7, just some spite moves, but ultimately rook takes g6 is going to be mating. Alright. So after, excuse me, rook takes a7, yeah, there's just nothing for black to do. So that's king f8, so that's the dead end. Another try is king to g8, but now bishop to h6 is pretty obviously decisive. So let's say he plays c5, getting the bishop into play, rook a to e1, and now nothing really good for black to try. If he plays rook to d8, and then rook g7 check, and then rook goes back to d7, that's winning all kinds of material with a quick mate. And if he plays, let's say, bishop to c6 to overprotect the e8 square and keep his rook on c8 protected, well, rook to g7 check, king f8, and now rook e to e7 forces mate in, I think, about 3 more moves. So here's the basic idea. Let's say bishop to d5, then we check, and then we check, and then we give mate. So it's a really nice little pattern there. Funny little smothered mate. But even if you didn't see that, you can look for another one, and here's another way to do it. It's a move slower, but it all gets the job done and doesn't require any brilliancy. So mate like that. Okay, so black is toast is the bottom line here. All right, after rook to e7, then since king f8 and king g8 don't work, you try king f6. And now after rook a to e1, black, in fact, resigned, because it's a forced mate here. Bishop to c3 is coming, but also, actually, the main threat here is to play, actually, I won't tell you just yet. You can figure this out for yourself. So stop the recording, see if you can figure out what white's mating idea, or the most efficient mating idea is. Alright, well, here it is. So the basic plan is to play rook from 1 to e6 check, and after king f5, then we drop the rook back to e5, and that leaves black a miserable option. So with this rook here, if the king goes back to f6, then simply bishop to g5 is mate. On the other hand, if when my rook comes to e5, his king goes to g4, well then simply h3 check, king h4, bishop to g5 check, king goes to h5, and then g4 is checkmate. So let's see what this looks like in variations. Okay, so if h5, check, check. The idea of h5 is to stop g4 mate, but now there's a different mate, like that. Fun stuff. If he tries instead h6, with the idea of stopping the bishop to g5 part of that, well now, actually white has checkmate in 2 moves. Can you find it? Okay, well the answer is G4. And black does anything he likes as long as it's legal. Doesn't matter. Rook goes to E6, and that's checkmate. Okay, likewise, if black tries the move G5, hoping maybe to stop some of those ideas, and also hoping maybe to get the king to G6, once again G4, and Rook 1 to E6, mate next move is unstoppable. Alright, next idea, maybe knight to D7, hoping to jettison a piece, but to achieve some kind of chances for survival. Well, here too, G4 is a mating move, threatening Rook 1 to E6 once again. And now let's say black plays knight C5. Okay, let me play H4, threatening G5 or bishop to G5. Bishop G5, mate in 1. Alright, let's say black tries knight to E4. Of course we just take, that's pointless. If G5, excuse me, trying to give his king some wiggle room, well, now I switch diagonals and give mate on G7. Okay, on G4 if he plays knight to F8, again H4, and now if H6, bishop C3 is mate, or if G5, and then same pattern we just saw a moment ago. Alright, so going back to the position after Rook A to E1, where he resigned, the last try is maybe Rook H to F8. And this one, and here, G4 doesn't work, because after G4 he plays Rook to F7. Alright, I mean I play bishop C3 and I'm winning the Rook, so I'm dead one there as well, but it's not a forced mate just yet. So the quick way to mate is Rook 1 to E6, King F5, Rook E5 check, and again King F6, Bishop G5. So actually this is more or less what we saw before. The one difference being that actually we can mate a move faster like that. So as I said, for this reason, black gave up after Rook A to E1. And this is, I would say, an appropriate position for the game to have ended. So black never did get those desperate hopes of activity. You can see the knight on B6 is still dominated. The bishop on A8 is still dominated. His rook on C8 never left that lousy square. The rook on H8 never got to move at all. And his most active piece is the king, and the result of its activity is an inevitable checkmate. So this is a game I felt very good about, and but the main thing was just that it was fun and it was beneficial. So all of those things kind of put together lets me really very warmly recommend to you playing email chess or correspondence chess of whatever variety. And again, it's something that I've done off and on for years, and almost always with a great deal of pleasure and benefit. So I hope you enjoyed the game, and maybe for some of you who don't like to face the dragon, I've given you a fiendish little idea that you can try in your own games. But mostly it's, I hope that you are at least a little bit sold on the value of correspondence games for your own play. So thanks, everyone, and I hope to see you next week. And hopefully, when I do see you in the next show, it'll be with one of the viewers' games. So let's keep hoping for that. Everyone should bug Josh Specht to get that going if he hasn't already. And also, do a little bit of advertising, my usual weekly plug for my blog at chessmind.powerblogs.com. chessmind.powerblogs.com. Thanks a lot. See you next time. Bye-bye.